Dead America. Tales from the Front Lines. Bitten by Derek Slayton. Chapter 1. Day 0+6. The sun hung high in the sky, casting a brilliant radiance upon the bridge that stretched over the river just west of downtown Wichita, Kansas. At this hour, one would typically expect the hustle and bustle of everyday life, with cars and pedestrians moving about their business. However, the current scene was a far cry from normalcy. Instead of the usual traffic, an eerie procession now unfolded on the ridge. A relentless army of the undead, their lifeless eyes scanning hungrily for sustenance. The cacophonous symphony of car horns had given way to the staccato rhythm of gunfire, and the sweet melodies of music inside vehicles had been replaced by the haunting moans of the approaching undead. The bridge, it seemed, had transformed into a nightmare. Sergeant Conrad stood atop a two-story building just off to the side of the bridge. His keen eyes focused through binoculars, observing the dire situation. Lying beside him was Corporal Peck, who peered through the scope of his sniper rifle, both men fixated on the unfolding chaos. "Have I mentioned just how much I hate this detail?" Corporal Peck quipped. "Not in the last 5 minutes," replied Sergeant Conrad, a wry smile forming on his face. They shared a brief moment of relative ease as they continued to scan the bridge. On the bridge itself, dozens of soldiers toiled relentlessly, moving heavy materials to create a makeshift barricade. Their efforts were met with fierce resistance from the encroaching horde of zombies drawn by the sounds of gunfire and the clattering of machinery. Cars, initially used as a temporary blockade, were proving inadequate as the relentless pressure of the undead pushed them aside. The military was stretched thin, grappling with the dual challenges of quelling unrest among the civilian population and combating the zombie menace in rural areas. The decision to block off the city had been made as a temporary solution, knowing it wouldn't last. Rumors circulated, hinting at a more significant objective in the horizon, and the barricade merely needed to hold long enough to facilitate the military's next move. Sergeant Conrad's gaze remained locked on the bridge as soldiers maneuvered heavy concrete barriers into position along the eastbound lanes. These brave individuals faced a daunting task as they confronted relentless waves of zombies, pushing against the cars parked ahead of them. Securing those barriers had been a harrowing endeavor, with soldiers having to plow through the zombie horde, park the vehicles, and leap into the icy river below. The strong current had swept several soldiers a mile downstream before they could be rescued. Thankfully, there had been no fatalities, but a few had suffered from hypothermia. What followed was a grim spectacle on the bridge as soldiers advanced, executing every undead creature in their path. Half of their ammunition was spent just on the eastbound lanes, but it was a grim necessity. Sergeant Conrad knew that the westbound lanes would present another challenge, but gaining a foothold on one side of the bridge was the first crucial step. Peering through his scope, Corporal Peck alerted his sergeant. "Sarge, left side by the blue sedan." Conrad adjusted his view and spotted a cluster of zombies pushing against the sedan. Gaining some traction. "Just normal movement. The ground team can handle it," he replied. Undeterred, Peck continued to push the issue. "Tall guy, green shirt, about 4 rows back." Conrad meticulously scanned the creatures, eventually identifying the one matching Peck's description. Unlike the decaying masses, this one seemed fresher, with vivid red blood still staining its clothes. "You think it's a runner?" Conrad inquired. "I think it's worth a bullet to make sure that it isn't," Peck responded. "Works for me. Do your thing," Conrad approved. With utmost precision, Peck steadied his aim, took a deep breath, and squeezed the trigger. A single shot echoed across the bridge as the creature's head erupted in a gruesome display of gore. "Nice shot," Conrad commended. "You don't keep me around for my looks," Peck chuckled. The two men shared a moment of levity before returning their attention to the bridge. Down below, soldiers acknowledged their sniping support with a thumbs up, grateful for the assistance. "Looks like the boys down there are appreciative," Conrad remarked. Continuing their observations, they noted that the soldiers on the bridge had successfully blocked one lane with concrete barriers. Another team labored tirelessly to move more barriers into place, unloading them from the back of a truck. Metal beams were laid behind them to secure the barriers to the ground, and the plan was to add another row of concrete barriers for added stability. This laborious process had been previously executed on a different bridge, and it had taken 2 full days to complete. Despite the tireless efforts of multiple teams working around the clock, it remained physically exhausting work. "I don't know why they just don't blow these bridges up. Wouldn't that be easier?" Peck mused. "Would you really want to be the politician that blew up Wichita?" Conrad countered. "It's not blowing up the city, just the bridges around it. Seriously, give me one good reason why we should leave the bridges intact." Peck challenged. 11 o'clock, Conrad interjected. Peck shifted his focus, confused at first, but realizing that Conrad was directing him to look at his 11 o'clock. He complied and observed a nearby apartment building. "An apartment building?" Peck questioned. "Look towards the top floor," Conrad directed. Peck scanned the towering structure, eventually spotting the peculiar sight. "Holy shit!" Peck exclaimed. "Yep," Conrad concurred. On a balcony of the 12th floor, a young woman was busy attaching something to the railing. Moments later, she unfurled a sheet marked with a message. Both men read the plea for help. "Please help. Apartment 1246. Running out of food," Conrad read aloud. Pep questioned, "What does this have to do with the bridge exactly? There's thousands of those things between her and us. Not like she's making a run for it." "Gotta keep that hope alive, though. At some point, this bullshit will be over with, and people like her will need a way out," Conrad replied. "No offense, Sarge, but that's pretty weak." "She could always go east," Peck remarked. Conrad shrugged in response to Peck's contemplations. "What do you want from me, Corporal?" "That's the best reason I can come up with. For all we know, the higher-ups just don't trust people like you with high explosives," he remarked casually. Pep acknowledged the notion with a nod. Probably a solid idea. Still, that's got to be a rough way to go out. Trapped with no hope of escape. The extra salt in the wound, seeing us just across the way, and we can't help. Conrad sighed and leaned against the building's edge. "We can't save them all. I wish we could, but we can't." Both men shared a moment of solemnity as the radio crackled to life, breaking their conversation. "Sergeant Conrad, do you copy?" A voice came through. "Go for Conrad," Conrad responded, his attention turning to the radio. "We're down here at the construction site, loading up the next round of concrete barriers, and we've run into an issue." The voice on the other end explained. "What is it?" Conrad inquired. "Well, the forklift malfunctioned and ended up dropping it onto the legs of a couple of our men," the soldier explained further. "Are they okay?" Conrad asked, concern in his voice. "I had to send them off to the medical post outside of town. They'll live, but their running days are probably over," the soldier reported. "That's good. So, what's the status on the loading?" Conrad inquired. "We're having to do it by hand, and we're short on manpower. Is there any chance you can send a few men from the bridge to help us out?" the soldier requested. "Negative, soldier. They have their hands full. But I can come down and lend a hand," Conrad offered. "Thank you. We'll be here," the soldier acknowledged. Pep chimed in, offering his assistance. "I can go with you if you need me to." Conrad shook his head. "I'll be all right. Construction yard is just half a mile down. You keep watch on the bridge. I'll be back in a few." "I'll cover them and let you know if there's any issue," Peck assured him. Conrad nodded and walked to the far side of the building, grabbing the ladder and quickly descending to the ground. He pulled out his handgun, not taking any chances. Though they had done a sweep of the area before setting up, many buildings on this side of the bridge still harbored potential dangers. They didn't have the time or manpower to clear them completely, so securing them as best as possible was their only option. The noise generated by the gunfire and construction had attracted every nearby creature. While the threat was relatively low, it was still ever-present. Conrad swiftly moved down the road towards the construction site, with corpses lining the way, carefully moved to the gutter to keep the path clear. He knew that these people deserved better treatment, but it was a luxury they couldn't afford in the midst of the ongoing crisis. The walk was an uneventful one, with the only real excitement being a creature smacking up against the glass from inside a restaurant. Conrad took a moment to stop and look at the poor soul, a waitress missing half of her face from a bite. He shook his head and continued on. The journey remained uneventful until he reached within a block of the construction site. Fear gripped him as gunshots echoed in the distance. His radio crackled to life again, conveying a voice filled with terror. Contact, contact. The gunfire intensified, prompting Conrad to break into a run towards the battle. As he reached the entrance of the construction yard, a gruesome sight met his eyes. A horde of 40 creatures shambled relentlessly towards a small group of soldiers who mounted a desperate defense behind the concrete barriers. Conrad's instincts took over, but as he reached for his rifle, he realized he had left it on the roof with Peck. He cursed himself silently. "Great time to let your guard down," he muttered under his breath. Conrad swiftly drew his knife with his offhand and charged into the construction zone. The soldiers continued to lay down covering fire, diverting the attention of the approaching horde as Conrad approached from the side. He took careful aim with his handgun, firing several rounds and eliminating several creatures before they even knew he was there. One of the ghouls turned towards him, only to be met with a knife to the forehead. Conrad pulled the blade out and lowered his shoulder, shoving the next creature into the group, then raised his handgun and fired, taking down a few more. Before he could shift his focus to the fallen ones, a zombie grabbed him from behind, clutching his shoulders tightly. Conrad dropped to the ground, preventing the creature from biting him, but breaking free in the process. Crawling backward a few feet, Conrad stood up abruptly, flipping the ghoul end over end. As it landed with a thud, he aimed his handgun at its head and blew a chunk of it away. Another zombie staggered towards him, and he swung his knife with all his might, striking the creature in the side of the head. The next ghoul approached, and he attempted to pull the knife out for another attack, but it was slick with blood, causing his hand to slip from the grip. Conrad's hand brushed against the zombie's face, his arm having too much momentum without the blade in his hand. He watched in helpless horror as the creature grabbed his wrist and sank its teeth into the top of his forearm. In response, Conrad raised his handgun and fired at point-blank range, killing the creature. Sergeant Conrad stopped fighting, stunned by the gruesome turn of events. He could only stare down at the fatal wound, a whirlwind of emotions rushing through him. Bullets continued to fly around him, dispatching the remaining ghouls. After a brief, chaotic exchange of gunfire, the weapons fell silent, leaving Conrad alone with his thoughts, contemplating his fate. Chapter 2. Sergeant Conrad found himself standing amidst a nightmarish landscape. A sea of lifeless bodies sprawled around him, and an intense, searing pain shooting through his arm. The wound throbbed with the heat, making it feel like his limb was engulfed in flames. His stupor was abruptly shattered when a fellow soldier rushed towards him. "Sergeant, are you okay?" the soldier inquired, his voice reaching Conrad through the haze. Conrad struggled for a moment to focus on the soldier's voice before finally managing to respond. "Yes, I'm..." Words failed him, and he trailed off, grappling for expression. The soldier's gaze dropped to the gnarly bite wound on Conrad's arm, and he urgently called out, "Medic! We need a medic over here." "It's okay, soldier. "I don't need a medic," Conrad replied, but his tone was stern. The soldier persisted, "But, Sergeant." Conrad's patience snapped, and he sharply retorted, "I said I don't need a medic." The soldier took a step back, raising his hands in a placating gesture, trying to calm the agitated sergeant. It worked to some extent. "I'm sorry, soldier. It's just..." Conrad's voice wavered. "I know, Sarge. I know," the soldier empathized. Both men understood the grim implications of that bite. A death sentence. In the heavy silence that followed, another soldier rushed over, carrying a small medical bag. "Somebody call for a medic," the newcomer asked. The soldier who had initially called for the medic subtly shook his head, but Sergeant Conrad motioned for him to approach. "I know you can't treat it, but if you wouldn't mind wrapping it up to stop the bleeding," Conrad requested. The medic inspected the bite mark, his face paling. "Sergeant, I can stop the bleeding, but I'm going to have to report this." Conrad sighed, knowing the inevitable outcome. "I know it's a lethal bite, but there's no immediate danger because it's on a non-vital part of the body." "Be that as it may, Sergeant, I still have to report it," the medic insisted. Conrad continued, "You know what happens when you do that, don't you?" The medic nodded solemnly. "Yes, I do. They send a team to collect me, where I'll be poked and prodded for a few hours before they take me out back and put me down like an old horse. Now I know that's my fate, and there's nothing I can do to change that, and I know you have to call it in. All that I ask is that you give me a few hours," Conrad implored. The medic hesitated, torn between duty and compassion. Finally, he spoke up. "You have 1 hour before I call it in. I've had some issues with my radio over the last couple of days, so I can make that story believable. After that, you're reported." "Best I can do." "Thank you," Conrad acknowledged. "You're welcome. Now let me see that arm," the medic said, tending to the wound. Meanwhile, the soldier who had initially approached Conrad remained uncertain about his role. "Soldier, I need you to keep doing what you were doing. Get that barricade set up," Conrad instructed. The soldier snapped out of his reverie, nodding resolutely. "Yes, Sergeant. We'll get it done." The soldier hurried back to the truck where concrete barriers were being loaded, and the medic finished bandaging Conrad's wound. 1 hour, Sergeant. Use it wisely," the medic advised. Conrad nodded and walked away, contemplating his impending fate. Despite his efforts to push the bite out of his mind, the excruciating pain served as a constant reminder. Got an hour left before life as you know it is over. So what to do? Conrad pondered aloud. His gaze settled on a nearby restaurant, its zombie waitress serving as a grim reminder of the fate that awaited the sergeant. A sign reading bar hung beside her head, tempting him with the thought of drowning his sorrows. That's certainly one way to go about it. Not like they could court-martial me for being drunk on duty. Plus, you can finally afford the top-shelf stuff, Conrad mused, gazing at the zombie waitress with a heavy heart. I'm sorry that happened to you. A life cut so short. If I were here, I would have done my best to protect you, he whispered to the lifeless figure. As he stood there, the realization dawned on him about how he could make the most of his remaining time. I may not have been here to make a difference in your life, but there's somebody out there who I can make a difference for, Conrad decided. He turned away from the tragic scene and sprinted toward a building where Corporal Peck was perched, manning a sniper's position. As he approached, Peck jumped in surprise. Christ, Sarge, you about gave me a heart attack. Thought a runner managed to get up here, Peck exclaimed. Ignoring Peck's initial shock, Conrad urgently asked, Where are the binoculars? Confused but complying, Peck handed them over. Conrad focused the binoculars on an apartment building across the street. While he couldn't see the area directly in front of it, he observed a swarm of zombies on the other side of the river. Peck noticed the bandage on Conrad's arm and inquired, Get scraped up moving those barriers. Conrad didn't sugarcoat the truth. Got bitten. Peck's face turned ashen, panic evident in his voice. You got bitten. What the hell, Sarge? Come on, you're messing with me, right? Nope. One of those things took a chunk out of my arm, Conrad confirmed. Peck stood beside Sergeant Conrad, their faces etched with a mixture of determination and fear. The chilling reality of their situation weighed heavily on them both. My God, Conrad, Corporal Peck stammered, struggling to find the right words. We have to. We can. Sergeant Conrad's expression remained grim. There's nothing that can be done. We both know the bite is going to kill me, sooner rather than later. Peck's mind raced, grappling with the gravity of the situation. Does anybody else know? He asked, seeking a glimmer of hope. Conrad nodded somberly. Yeah, the medic. But he's waiting an hour to call it in. Well, that gives us some time to send you out properly, Peck suggested. Let's go hit the bar or something. Conrad's gaze shifted towards the young woman in the apartment building across the river. Peck shook his head in disbelief. Are you out of your mind? That's a suicide mission. Conrad raised his wounded arm as if to emphasize his point. Is it really suicide if you're already dead? Peck scratched his head, torn by uncertainty. Maybe. Hell, I don't know. I wasn't even smart enough to be allowed into the philosophy class. But if you try to get to that apartment building, you aren't going to see the sunset. Conrad responded with sarcasm. Glad to know that after all these years, you still have so much faith in me. Peck tried to clarify. It's not that, Conrad. It's just, those are some long odds. Determined, Conrad asserted. Long odds or not, I'm going to roll the dice. If nothing else, I'll feel better about my final hours. Peck probed further. So what's the plan, huh? Let's say you get over there in one piece. Conrad raised an eyebrow and gestured to his wounded arm. Okay, get over there in mostly one piece, and you get up to the apartment to the fair maiden in the sky. Then what? You may not be worried about being bitten, but she sure will be. I can protect her, Conrad replied confidently. Peck remained skeptical. To get her out of the building. Maybe. But then what? You're going to have to figure out a way to push through 1,000 of those things. Then figure out a way to get her across the bridge to safety. Conrad paused, his plan forming in his mind. No, I just have to get her to the water. Peck furrowed his brow, puzzled. I suppose you're going to want me to drive down to the docks to pick you up. Conrad nodded with a determined smile. If you see us, get to the water. Yep, I want you there. Okay, if you make it that far, I'll be there, Peck agreed. But first things first. How the hell are you getting across the water? That bridge is jam-packed with those things. Conrad admitted, I have an idea, but it's not a particularly good one. Peck chuckled. Most of your ideas aren't. As Conrad prepared to depart, Peck jumped up, extending his hand. You ain't walking away just yet. Conrad approached Peck, and they exchanged a heartfelt handshake and a bro hug. It's been an honor, Conrad, Peck said sincerely. Same here, Peck. Same here, Conrad replied. Finally, they broke the embrace, giving each other a nod before Conrad headed toward the ladder, descending to the bottom where their truck awaited. He opened the tailgate, revealing a crate filled with weapons and ammunition. Conrad carefully selected additional magazines for his rifle and handgun, ensuring his vest was fully loaded. He swapped out his bloodied blade for a cleaner one and stashed another knife in his boot. You never know, Conrad muttered to himself as he grabbed a couple of hand grenades and affixed them to his belt. This very much is a suicide mission, so it's possible that I never get to use these. On the flip side, I would be able to take out several of those things with these, which helps everyone out. Yeah, we're taking them. With his supplies in order, Conrad shut the supply crate. He took a moment to gather his thoughts, addressing himself as he walked toward the bridge. "Well, Conrad, you've already royally screwed up once today, and it's cost you everything. But it's time to shake that off because you have the chance to do one last good thing with your life. You can't mess up again. If you do, an innocent woman dies. Now get it together because there's a mission to get done." Conrad tried to focus on the task ahead, but his thoughts kept drifting back to the painful bite on his arm. In a desperate attempt to regain control, he pushed his thumb into the wound, a searing pain shooting through his arm. He yelled in agony, but forced himself to regain composure. "Let's do this," Conrad muttered to himself as he approached the bridge, determination burning in his eyes. Chapter 3. Sergeant Conrad strode confidently towards the edge of the bridge, his men positioned 100 yards ahead. The grim scene revealed rows of corpses piled on both sides of the road, a gruesome path cleared for the soldiers and their makeshift barricades. Occasional gunshots punctuated the air ahead, soldiers working diligently to protect the barricade and create a more permanent defense. Conrad's gait transformed into a self-assured strut, an odd sense of arrogance settling upon him as he embraced his seemingly suicidal mission. He acknowledged the irrationality of his confidence, but there was something about walking towards certain death that stirred his spirit. As he approached the front line, one of the soldiers noticed him and pointed him out to his comrade. The two soldiers exchanged uncertain glances as their sergeant approached. "Sergeant, is everything okay?" asked one of the soldiers. Conrad reassured them. "Don't worry, Private. You're doing a great job out here." The other soldier chimed in. "Thank you. If you came down to get a closer look at what we're doing, I can give you the tour." "Another time, Private," Conrad replied. "What I really need is help getting over the edge of the bridge." Both soldiers exchanged perplexed looks and then directed their concern towards Conrad. "You want to go over the side of the bridge?" one of them asked. "I do indeed," Conrad affirmed. The soldier inquired further, "May I ask why, Sergeant?" "Of course you can, soldier. I need to get to the other side," Conrad explained. Both soldiers wore a concerned expression as they processed the request. "Now, from my vantage point on the roof back there," Conrad continued, "I could see that there is a running platform on the side of the bridge, part of the support structure. I realize it wasn't intended to be walked on, but I think it'll work just fine. The end of it should be right where you boys have pushed up to." Conrad led the soldiers to the side of the bridge, where a concrete barricade pressed up against a car marked the edge. Dozens of zombies on the other side grew agitated as he approached. Peering over the edge, he spotted the landing about 8 feet below, with drainage slots along the outer edge of the bridge's concrete barrier, providing some necessary handholds. He examined the walkway itself, realizing it was more of a balance beam than a proper walkway. "So close, yet so far away," Conrad mused. "I don't understand, Sergeant," the soldier said. "Even if I grip the bridge at the base of the barrier here, I'm still going to have to drop a good foot before I hit the walkway. I'm not worried about walking it because I can use the bridge to steady myself. But that foot drop scares me. If I don't hit it just right, I'm going to go right into the water," Conrad replied. The soldier suggested, "What if I hang over the side? Let you use my legs to steady yourself as you descend." Conrad scrutinized the soldier and nodded in approval. "One of you hanging and the other bracing him. I can work with that." One of the soldiers tapped the other, pointing out the wound on Conrad's arm. The sergeant noticed and reassured them. "Don't worry. I still have plenty of time before I get the munchies." Both men nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation but choosing not to comment on it. "Okay, let me get into position and we'll get you down there, Sarge," one of the soldiers said. The soldier climbed over the edge, planting his elbows into the low barrier and letting his legs hang lower than the handhold that Conrad would have to rely on. The soldier nodded to Conrad and the other private, who helped brace the hanging soldier. Conrad climbed over and dangled from the side of the bridge, using the soldier's leg to steady himself as he descended. "Hang on tight," Conrad instructed. "I'm good, Sarge," the soldier replied. Conrad gripped the soldier's leg tightly, lowering himself to the narrow walkway below. It took a tense moment for him to find his footing, but he eventually did. Once steady, he let go and used his hands to brace against the bridge. After ensuring that the private was pulled back to safety, both soldiers looked down at Conrad. "It's been an honor, Sarge," one of them said. "Same here, gentlemen," Conrad replied. "Give 'em hell out there," the other soldier encouraged. Conrad nodded and began to inch his way across the side of the bridge. The journey was slow and treacherous, with the wind threatening to knock him off course. However, he held on tenaciously. Several minutes passed as Conrad ventured halfway across the bridge. He paused for a moment to catch his breath, disturbed to hear the sounds of excited moans coming from above. He looked up, breathing a sigh of relief when he realized that the barrier is too high for them to overcome. "This is a real fine idea you had here, Conrad. Just had to play hero one last time, didn't you?" Pushing aside self-doubt, Conrad shrugged off the inner criticism and continued his journey across the bridge. 10 minutes later, he found himself at the end of the walkway, 100 yards away from the end of the bridge and the other side of the river. Focusing on a handhold just above him, Conrad steadied himself and prepared to make a leap. He knew he had only one shot at this. Conrad jumped up, grabbing the edge with all his strength. His muscles burned as he pulled himself up, using his good arm to steady himself as he reached for the top of the barrier. With his heart pounding, Conrad emerged from behind the barrier, ready to jump over to the bridge. However, he was immediately confronted by a zombie. The creature moaned and reached for him, just inches away. Before he could react, the side of the zombie's head exploded and it dropped to the ground. Conrad glanced back across the bridge towards the building he had been on, giving his sniper corporal a grateful thumbs up. He leaped over the barrier, landing firmly on the bridge as more zombies approached. While most of the creatures were near the barricades, several dozen were still scattered along the last 100 yards. Rather than risk gunshots that could attract more attention, Conrad drew both knives, readying himself for the challenge. He moved swiftly, dispatching zombies one by one, using his knives with deadly precision. Conrad lowered his shoulder and plowed through a couple of approaching zombies. As they fell to the ground, he looked around for a path forward. Spotting the apartment building a couple of blocks off the bridge to his left, he focused his attention in that direction. He continued to eliminate threats as he jogged towards the end of the bridge, relying on the corporal's sniper support to clear the path. Finally, he reached the end of the bridge where a multitude of creatures awaited. "Whatever you're going to do, you need to do it now," Conrad urged, fully aware that time was of the essence. Conrad's heart raced as he scanned his surroundings frantically. Ahead, he spotted an office building at the corner with glass windows facing the street. Between him and the building stood a horde of 50 zombies, with hundreds more closing in from all directions. Without hesitation, Conrad sprinted towards the building, sheathing his knives and drawing his handgun. He fired a few rounds at the creatures directly in front of him while urgently signaling towards the building. Several zombies reached out, their bloody fingertips grazing his arm as he narrowly avoided their grasp. In the distance, a gunshot echoed, and he watched as a zombie's head exploded. Conrad continued to gesture toward the building, hoping his sniper would understand his intentions. Still 40 yards away from the building, Conrad was forced to pause in the middle of the street. He aimed his handgun and fired rapidly at the approaching zombies, emptying 10 rounds in seconds, each shot finding its mark and dropping another undead threat. It was enough to create a small opening, allowing him to push through. Quickly reloading his handgun, Conrad closed the distance, now just 20 yards from the building. He witnessed another zombie's head explode from a well-placed sniper shot. Realizing that hand signals weren't effective, he grabbed his radio from his belt and shouted into it. The glass, he yelled desperately. As a zombie grabbed his arm and tugged it towards its gaping mouth, Conrad lost his grip on the radio, and it fell to the pavement. With swift precision, he aimed his handgun at the zombie's forehead and pulled the trigger, obliterating its skull. He attempted to retrieve the radio, but was interrupted by another approaching zombie that kicked it out of reach. "Damn it," Conrad muttered, shoving the ghoul aside and moving towards the office building. Within 10 yards of it, he watched as a bullet pierced the top of the glass, creating a spider web of cracks. "Come on, one more," he urged. Conrad fought his way through the last few zombies blocking his path. As he reached the glass, another bullet penetrated from the other side, further weakening it. With as much force his tired legs could provide, he jumped through the weakened glass, crashing into the building. He landed hard on the ground, tiny glass shards raining down around him. It took a moment to collect himself, brushing away the broken glass from his face. The moaning of approaching zombies snapped him back to attention. Conrad raised his handgun, firing several shots as a couple of extra heads exploded from the impact. "Nice shooting, Peck," he acknowledged, giving credit to his sniper. Pulling himself to his feet, he looked out the window at the approaching horde of zombies. Turning away from the window, he faced the dimly lit interior of the office building, with sunlight filtering in from the far end through the windows. "Okay, let's go to work," Conrad determinedly declared, ready to face the horrors that awaited him inside the building. Chapter 4. Conrad moved swiftly through the dimly lit office space, his handgun held at the ready in a tight grip. Each empty office and cubicle door he encountered was meticulously inspected, his senses on high alert, prepared to confront any threat that might emerge. As he continued his cautious advance, relief washed over him as he encountered no immediate danger. However, the eerie sounds of moaning and stumbling creatures echoed behind him, a constant reminder of the peril lurking in the shadows. The darkness surrounding him, while unnerving, provided some cover from the pursuing horrors. Halfway through the building, Conrad's instincts guided him to a desk where he snatched up a metal stapler. He hurled it with precision towards the shattered window from which he had entered moments ago. The stapler collided with the wall, creating a clattering distraction that drew a substantial number of zombies away from his path. He knew it was only a temporary respite, but he welcomed the momentary reprieve. Reaching the back of the building, Conrad's gaze extended towards the next block. A sense of relief washed over him as he observed that the zombies on the street outside were relatively dispersed. He moved to the far corner of the office, which boasted floor-to-ceiling windows. From this vantage point, he had a commanding view of the side street and the apartment building's parking lot beyond. A significant number of zombies separated him from his destination, but it seemed manageable. Sergeant Conrad muttered under his breath. "Just a shame Peck doesn't have a higher vantage point. Would have been nice to have some cover." He briefly checked his handgun, replacing the half-empty magazine with a fully loaded one. The thought of drawing his rifle crossed his mind, but he resisted, prioritizing mobility for the task at hand. He understood the necessity of conserving firepower for the inevitable confrontation on his return journey. Sergeant Conrad reassured himself. "Okay, just need to get down another block without cover and break into a building that could very well be teeming with zombies. Nothing to it." Conrad moved toward the side door of the office building, maintaining a low profile to avoid detection by the zombies outside. He carefully unlocked the door, and the faint click drew the attention of a nearby creature. He bided his time until the zombie shuffled closer before swinging the door open with a forceful thrust. The metal frame struck the creature squarely on the nose, sending it stumbling backward, affording him the opportunity to dash out of the office building. Conrad swiftly drew his knife and drove it into the side of the creature's skull, dispatching it efficiently. A few zombies in the vicinity took notice, but he paid them no mind as he sprinted up the street. His boots pounded on the pavement, alerting every creature within earshot to his presence. To avoid getting overwhelmed, Conrad zigzagged diagonally across the street, skillfully navigating his path to minimize encounters with the ghoulish beings. As he approached the next block, he lowered his shoulder and forcefully knocked down a couple of creatures, leaving them struggling to regain their footing. He had more pressing matters at hand. Conrad's gaze locked onto the apartment building, and he began formulating his approach. The parking deck adjacent to the building appeared overrun with zombies near its entrance. Meanwhile, the front of the building was guarded by a congregation of ghouls, but the front door's shattered window offered a potential entry point. Sergeant Conrad remarked under his breath, "That's going to have to do." Conrad sprinted towards the building's front entrance, deftly weaving past unsuspecting zombies and toppling others in his path. As he neared the door, he quickly aimed his handgun, unleashing a barrage of precisely placed shots in rapid succession that brought down the creatures surrounding the entrance. Conrad reached the broken door, slipping beneath the metal bar and into the building. However, his relief was short-lived, as he discovered that the door led to a vestibule rather than the interior of the building. Panic surged within him as he desperately tugged and pushed on the other locked door to no avail. His heart sank further as he noticed a metal mesh on the other side of the glass, evidence of a previous burglary. Turning to face the door he had just entered, he saw zombies closing in, mere yards away. In a desperate decision, he reached for a hand grenade on his belt, his voice trembling as he muttered, "This is such a bad idea." Conrad's heart raced as he pulled the pin from the hand grenade, but kept his hand firmly on the lever, reluctant to release it just yet. He sprinted toward the door, observing zombies dangerously close, with one practically at the entrance. Realizing that stepping outside would be a death sentence, he took a calculated risk. Conrad forcefully kicked the metal bar on the door, breaking it off at one side. With the door ajar, he reached out and grabbed the nearest zombie by its shirt, hauling it into the vestibule. In one swift motion, he tossed the live grenade inside and hurled the zombie on top of it. His handgun raised, Conrad fired a precise shot, taking down the creature, which lay atop the grenade. The explosion was imminent. The sergeant went back to the door and extended his arm outside, firmly grasping the next approaching zombie and ushering it into the vestibule. He quickly positioned himself in the far corner, ensuring a safe distance from the impending explosion. He deftly spun the creature around, its back now facing him, bracing himself for the blast. The detonation sent a shockwave through the confined space, with most of the blast absorbed by the fallen zombie. But the door bore the brunt of the explosion. Shrapnel fragments struck Conrad's leg, causing him pain, but it was overshadowed by the ringing in his ears and the disorienting concussion. As his senses gradually returned, Conrad was confronted by the sight of the still struggling zombie in his grasp. He shoved it forward and swiftly dispatched it with a shot to the back of the head. His own survival instincts kicked in as he fought to avoid sharing the same fate. Conrad's vision cleared, and he noticed more zombies closing in from the entrance, which had sustained additional damage. He quickened his pace, making his way to the blown-out door leading to the building's lobby. Remarkably, the metal gate on the door remained intact, but the blast had knocked it off its hinges, allowing him to slip through into the main lobby. Unfortunately, he had unwittingly granted the horde of zombies outside unrestricted access. Stairs. I need stairs, Conrad muttered to himself. Running up 12 flights of stairs wasn't an ideal option, but it seemed his only recourse. Despite the building's emergency power appearing to be operational, he couldn't risk using the elevator. He dashed through the lobby, scanning the perimeter for the stairwell. Spotting a sign directing him toward the emergency stairwell, he made his way to it. His heart sank as he neared the door, which was firmly shut, and a pile of debris obstructed its path. A spray-painted message across the door, reading danger, left no room for doubt, and a knock elicited moans and pounding from the other side. Damn it. Looks like it's an elevator ride after all, Conrad muttered in frustration. He turned to find that the zombies that had followed him inside were advancing down the hallway, effectively blocking his escape route. Okay, you assholes. Playtime is over, Conrad declared. He holstered his handgun and drew his assault rifle, positioning himself for a confrontation as he approached the shambling mob. With precision and composure, he unleashed a controlled barrage of shots, picking off the advancing zombies one by one in the narrow corridor. As he reached a corner, he turned it sharply and came face to face with a zombie. With a forceful shove and a rapid shot, he decapitated the creature. A couple of dozen zombies were now spread out in the lobby, with more pouring in through the damaged entrance. Conrad swiftly surveyed the area and located the elevator beside the front desk. He fired a few more rounds, clearing a path. Conrad approached the elevator, pulling out one of his knives to pry the doors open. While he succeeded in getting them moving, he discovered there was no power, and zombies were closing in. He fired several shots at the closest zombies, gaining a brief respite. As he looked up, Conrad spotted the emergency hatch and used his firearm to force it open. With the hatch accessible, he jumped up, narrowly avoiding the grasping hands of the zombies that had poured into the elevator. Slamming the hatch shut, he pulled himself up to the top, escaping their clutches. In the dimly lit elevator shaft, Conrad checked his surroundings with a flashlight and found it empty. All doors above him were closed, and he noticed a ladder along the wall leading upward. Who knew that a 12-story ladder climb was going to be the easiest part of my day? He mused as he embarked on the ascent. It took several minutes, but he eventually reached the top, the ladder conveniently positioned beside the door. Despite his efforts, the door wouldn't open on its own, so he employed the knife trick from earlier. With the thin metal yielding to the pressure, he managed to get the doors moving. As they opened, he noticed a zombie dangerously close to the entrance. Acting swiftly, he reached out, grabbed the zombie's shirt, and pulled it into the shaft. Conrad stood atop the ladder, listening as the moaning ghoul plummeted to the bottom before crashing onto the top of the elevator car. 12:48. Almost there, Conrad muttered, his breath quickening. He pulled out his rifle and removed the knife, wedging it beneath the doors to keep them open. Slowly and carefully, he moved down the hall, counting apartment numbers. Conrad's heart sank as he observed several zombies near the door he needed to reach, with more lurking beyond them. Let's hope you're not taking a nap. Raising his rifle, he fired multiple shots into the approaching group, knowing that every zombie on the floor would soon converge on his location. A few moments later, the door opened and a young woman inside tugged at his arm, urging him to stop firing and enter. They quickly closed the door, securing every lock they could find before the approaching zombies could breach the room. As Conrad turned around, the woman threw her arms around him in gratitude. Thank you, she exclaimed. Conrad returned the embrace, allowing her to hold on to him for a moment before gently pulling away. Thank you so much for coming. I saw you guys out there, but didn't think you saw me, the woman expressed. It's a good thing you caught my eye then, Conrad replied with a playful wink, hoping to put her at ease. I'm Sergeant Conrad. I'm Jenny. Well, Jenny, I'm going to get you out of here. But first, we need to make some preparations, Conrad assured her. Chapter 5. Conrad stepped out onto the balcony of the apartment, his eyes scanning the rooftop where Peck was stationed. With a hopeful wave, he tried to catch Peck's attention, and after a few moments, a bright flashlight began clicking on and off in response, signaling that he had succeeded. That's one problem down, Sergeant Conrad remarked. Jenny emerged from her bedroom carrying a couple of thick towels and tape. The only thing I had was masking tape. I hope that's okay. I can make that work, Conrad replied. They both settled down on the couch, and Conrad tore one of the towels in half before wrapping it around Jenny's arm. This isn't going to be a perfect defense by any means, but it should allow you to fend off one of those things if it gets close. Jenny examined her makeshift armor. My arm looks like one of those suits that guys use to train attack dogs. That's the general idea, Conrad said with a wry smile. Jenny noticed the bandage on Conrad's arm and he caught her looking. Yeah, probably should have been wearing one of these earlier today. I'm sorry, Sergeant, Jenny said. Please, just call me Conrad, he said. Sorry, my mother was Southern, so I have a lot of that politeness hardwired, Jenny explained. Conrad chuckled, shaking his head as he taped the towel to her arm. I was a military brat growing up, so I had a more rigorous version of your upbringing. Less, this is how you are supposed to act, and more, this is how you will act, or else there will be consequences. Sounds like an interesting upbringing, Jenny remarked. It had its ups and downs, but it made me the man I am today and is the big reason why I signed up, Conrad replied. Jenny's gaze once again fell on his bite, prompting a light-hearted chuckle from him. Well, hindsight is 20/20 after all. They both chuckled as Conrad finished wrapping up her second arm. Suddenly, they heard banging on the door, the creatures outside growing more excited. Guessing that's been happening a lot, Conrad inquired. Yeah, I'm the only person left on this floor. The others wanted to make a run for it and get out of town. I don't exactly know what happened, but I heard a lot of screaming. When I called out, they started banging on the door. It took them 2 days before they started wandering around the halls, Jenny explained. I'm sorry you had to go through that, Conrad sympathized. So how bad is it out there? I know it's bad here, but is it everywhere? Jenny asked. I'm afraid so. Well, I don't know if it's overseas, but America is smack dab in the middle of the shit, Conrad admitted, though he quickly caught himself after using strong language, prompting a laugh from Jenny. I worked in restaurants. Believe me when I say that I'm R-rated, Jenny replied with a grin. Conrad laughed as he finished her makeshift armor. Okay, we're good to go. How are we getting out of here? They sound like they're all by the door, Jenny observed. Conrad pondered for a moment before getting an idea. How good are the walls here? Nowhere near as good as they should be for what I pay for this place, Jenny replied. Excellent, Conrad said, rising and getting his bearings. He moved to the bedroom and knocked on the wall, realizing it was fairly hollow. Do you have a hammer? He asked. Jenny nodded and fetched a claw hammer. Conrad started hammering away at the wall, easily pulling away the cheap sheetrock. After a few moments, he reached the interior wall, which was slightly better made. With a couple of good whacks, he dented it before finally punching through it, creating a small hole no bigger than a baseball. That's going to take forever to get through, Jenny remarked. Conrad held up a hand grenade with a devious smile. I have a construction hack. Jenny's eyes widened as she realized his plan. Get back to the kitchen and hide behind the cabinets. As soon as this thing goes off, we're going to have to move. We get to the elevator shaft and climb down. Jenny followed his instructions, nodding in agreement. Conrad wedged the grenade into the hole he had made inside the wall. Really hope there's nobody else alive in here, because I just might burn this bitch to the ground, Conrad said with a sly smile on his face. Taking a deep breath, he pulled the pin and sprinted back to the kitchen, sliding to the ground. Jenny grabbed him, helping him get behind cover. Seconds later, a deafening blast ripped through the apartment, sending debris flying in all directions. It took them a moment to regain their senses. When they did, Conrad pulled Jenny up, readying his rifle. Stay close. Jenny nodded as they entered the bedroom, finding half the wall missing. They paused for a moment to admire the handiwork. That worked a little better than I expected, Conrad said. Conrad led them through the hole and into the other apartment. There, a creature lay flat on its back on the bedroom floor, having been knocked back by the blast, its skin shredded by the debris. Jenny averted her eyes as Conrad delivered a kill shot with his rifle. Come on, we don't have much time. The duo ran to the door, with Sergeant Conrad peering out through the peephole, ensuring that the area right in front of the door was clear. Satisfied with his check, he opened it quietly. Conrad stepped out first, casting a worried glance back towards Jenny's apartment which was now swarming with a dozen creatures just outside of it. He motioned for Jenny to follow, and they quickly made their way to the elevator shaft. Conrad reached the ladder first, and it was a bit of a reach for Jenny. He extended his hand and she grabbed it, allowing him to pull her over to the ladder. Unfortunately, his rifle clanged against the ladder, producing a loud noise that echoed through the shaft. A moment later, they heard moaning coming from the hallway. "Come on, we have to go," Conrad urged. Both of them started climbing down the ladder as quickly as possible, the moans growing louder from above. A few floors down, the first zombie fell from the open door above, startling Jenny, who let out a scream. The added noise attracted even more attention. Conrad looked up, spotting a small mob of creatures by the door, pushing forward. He halted his descent, grabbed Jenny, and pulled them to the side as far as possible. For a few tense moments, falling creatures rained down, one after another, plummeting to the elevator car below with sickening thuds. Then, as quickly as it began, it ended. No more moans came from above, only some slight movement and noise coming from 8 floors below. "Are you okay?" Conrad asked. "Yeah, I'm good," Jenny replied. "I don't think we're going to be getting off at the first floor," Conrad observed. "The second floor has an exit to the parking deck," Jenny suggested. "Good enough for me," Conrad agreed. They continued their descent, feeling a bit more at ease now that the threat from above had dissipated. Finally, they reached the second floor door. Conrad reached over, wedging his fingers into the doors and pulling as hard as he could. After a few moments, they swung open, revealing that there was nothing waiting for them on the other side. "Let me clear the area, and then I'll get you across," Conrad said. Jenny nodded as Conrad jumped out into the hallway. He spotted one creature at the far end, oblivious to their presence. Conrad got Jenny out of the shaft, and they quietly made their way towards the door leading to the parking garage. They stopped and peered outside, seeing a handful of zombies scattered about. "Okay, this is where things get difficult. We need to get down to the first floor and out to the street," Conrad explained. Jenny felt a bit nervous, but nodded in agreement. "There's a stairwell to the left, can't be more than 30 yards away." "Good. Now, I don't know what the street is going to look like. I set off a grenade at the front of the building that should have cleared those things out, but we won't know until we get there," Conrad warned. "I will follow close," Jenny assured him. Conrad readied his rifle before pushing open the door to the garage. Leading the way, he kept his aim trained on the nearest zombie. They moved quickly but silently across the parking deck towards the stairwell, thankfully finding it empty. They didn't rush, mindful not to let their footsteps echo in the concrete stairwell. They reached the first floor without incident. Conrad positioned them against the wall, stopping at the door and looking out. There were a couple dozen zombies pressed up against the wall of the parking deck, attracted by the earlier grenade explosion, but not clever enough to find their way to the entrance. His view wasn't great, but he could see beyond them to the street, where dozens of other ghouls were scattered about, with a large group congregating by the garage entrance. It was too thick for them to break through. Conrad returned to the stairwell, whispering, "If I clear the way, can you climb over the wall there?" Jenny peeked before retreating, giving him a nod and a thumbs up. "Okay, I'm going to be right behind you," Conrad said. Jenny and Conrad took a moment to gather themselves. He led them out, immediately raising his weapon and opening fire towards the creatures just a few yards away from the wall. The creatures took shots to the back of the head, dropping them to the ground and clearing a path for Jenny. However, the gunfire also attracted the attention of dozens of other ghouls. Jenny ran to the open area, jumping up onto the wall, struggling to pull herself over. Conrad continued firing as quickly as he could towards the oncoming mob, hitting his targets. Realizing that Jenny was struggling, Conrad temporarily ceased firing, rushing over and shoving her to the other side. She landed hard on the ground, and as she got up, she saw him continuing to fire as the mob closed in. "Come on!" Jenny shouted. Sergeant Conrad fired until his gun clicked empty. He tossed it over the wall towards Jenny before leaping over himself. As he pulled himself over, one of the zombies grabbed onto his leg, suspending him in the air for a moment as other zombies converged on the exposed limb. He fought to break free, and a horrific scream escaped his lips as a zombie bit into his calf. The pain jolted him, allowing him to kick free. Jenny pulled him over the wall, and they both crashed onto the ground. "You have to get up. You have to get up," Jenny urged. Conrad struggled to his feet with Jenny's help. He grabbed his rifle and loaded another magazine as they headed towards the water. The zombie mob was now in close pursuit from all angles. Chapter 6. Conrad stumbled as Jenny did her best to support him, their desperate steps echoing throughout the streets. With his rifle serving as a makeshift crutch, he slammed it into the pavement to keep himself from collapsing. Jenny's eyes darted frantically around, her panic mounting as the relentless horde of zombies closed in from all sides. Her heart raced as she struggled to maintain their momentum. Straight down the road. "Move!" barked Sergeant Conrad, his voice strained with urgency. Ahead, a few zombies lurched toward them, obstructing their path. Conrad raised his rifle and, despite the handicap of one arm, took a shot. The first bullet found its mark, shattering a zombie's skull, but the recoil sent his next 2 rounds astray. He steadied himself and fired again, this time hitting the target, but the undead closed in too fast. Jenny thrust out her towel-wrapped arm, shoving one of the creatures backward, sending it tumbling to the ground. The road ahead appeared clear until the approaching intersection, where a handful of zombies loomed. Jenny glanced over her shoulder, her eyes widening in terror as she saw the horde of undead closing in from behind. "Just keep looking forward. We don't have to worry about them," Conrad reassured her. Their breaths labored as they pushed onward. As they neared the intersection, more zombies emerged from around the corner, drawn by the commotion. Conrad fired sporadically, not aiming for kill shots, but merely trying to knock them down and clear a path. But as they reached the intersection, the few ghouls already there converged on them. Jenny raised her shielded arms, preparing to fend them off, but Conrad intervened. "I got this," he declared. Before Jenny could respond, Conrad lunged forward, each step sending waves of pain through his bitten leg. He attempted to plow through the group of zombies, but lacked the strength. Instead, he wrapped his arms around them, dragging them to the ground. Jenny rushed to his side, tugging at the back of his shirt to free him. But the zombies clung tenaciously. One of them sank its teeth into Conrad's shoulder, tearing away a sizable chunk of flesh. The searing pain surged through him, granting him a burst of adrenaline. With a tremendous effort, he broke free from their grasp and staggered to his feet. With Jenny's assistance, they managed to slip past the undead. Conrad was in dire straits, blood oozing from his shoulder and leg, struggling to stay upright. Jenny kept a firm grip on his arm, supporting him as they continued their desperate escape. "Just another block, Conrad. One more block, and we'll be safe," Jenny encouraged him as he grunted in agony. His determination to press on was fueled by the sight of the water just ahead. Approaching them were several zombies on the road, but as they drew nearer, the distant sound of gunfire echoed, and the undead's heads exploded one by one, startling Jenny. "It's my friend. We're okay," Conrad assured her. They reached the water's edge, sliding down the embankment and into the river without hesitation, paying no mind to the frigid shock of the water. For Conrad, the cold numbed his limbs, providing relief from the excruciating bites. Wading out into the water, they let the current carry them along. Jenny removed her towel protectors, not wanting them to weigh her down. They floated on their backs, treading water to preserve their body warmth. Gazing back at the shore, they observed the mass of zombies remaining on the road, unwilling to venture into the water. "I can't thank you enough for getting me out of there, Conrad," Jenny finally said. "It was the least I could do," he replied. They floated in silence for several minutes, Jenny unsure of what else to say to the man who had just saved her life. Then, she noticed Conrad beginning to lose consciousness. She shook him gently, trying to rouse him, and his eyes barely fluttered open. "You're not leaving me yet, Conrad," Jenny insisted. "I'm afraid we don't have the luxury of making that choice, Jenny. I need you to listen to me," Conrad said, his voice fading. "Conrad," she whispered. "Please. We didn't go through all that just to lose it now," he implored. "Okay," she relented. "I need you to start swimming back upstream, towards the other bank," Conrad directed. "I can get you over there," Jenny protested. "I won't make it to the docks, and you need to be away from me when I turn. I don't think I'll be able to swim, especially against the current. But the further away you are, the better," he explained. Jenny nodded, moved over to him, and embraced Conrad tightly. He patted her back with his good arm before gently pushing her away. "My friend, Corporal Peck, will be at the dock to pick you up. Now, get swimming because my eyes are getting heavy," Conrad whispered. "I'll never forget you," Jenny said, her voice trembling. "You better not," Conrad replied, his words fading as he slipped towards unconsciousness. As Jenny swam with all her strength against the relentless current, Conrad managed to summon one last smile as he faded away. Jenny, despite her tears, couldn't help but give a soft smile in response. After a solid minute of swimming, she grew exhausted and paused to tread water, gasping for breath. Turning her gaze back towards Conrad, who was now about 50 yards away, she watched him bobbing in the water, unable to determine if he was still breathing or not. Another minute passed before she got her answer. Conrad stirred as if awakening from a deep slumber, only to begin thrashing about wildly. Water splashed in every direction as he struggled futilely to gain traction. Jenny's eyes welled up with tears as she witnessed the man who had saved her succumb to the bites, transforming into one of those monstrous creatures. As much as she wanted to look away, she couldn't. She had to ensure he remained at a distance. Conrad continued to thrash before turning his gaze in her direction. Their eyes met for a brief, heart-wrenching moment. Hers were filled with tears, his with nothing but lifelessness. A mournful moan escaped Conrad's lips as he made a feeble attempt to swim towards her, but his complete lack of coordination thwarted any progress. For several minutes, the two of them floated in the water, Conrad never coming any closer to Jenny. She could only stare, her heart heavy with sorrow. Jenny was startled when a single gunshot erupted from the docks just above her. The bullet found its mark in Conrad's forehead, mercifully ending his struggle. Looking up, Jenny spotted another soldier, Corporal Peck, standing on the docks with a rifle in hand. He glanced back in her direction and motioned for her to swim towards him. The current carried her closer to the docks, and Corporal Peck extended a pole. She grabbed hold of it and was pulled to safety. Once on solid ground, he wrapped an emergency blanket around her. "Are you okay?" Corporal Peck inquired. "Yeah, I'm just shaken," Jenny replied, her voice trembling. "I would be too. You were right in the middle of the shit. I'm glad you got out of there safely," he consoled her. "I just wish Conrad could have made it with me," Jenny lamented. "I know it's not much comfort, but you should know that he died happy. He knew he had a death sentence and wanted to do one last good thing with his life. And he did, by getting you here," Corporal Peck reassured her. Jenny welled up with tears, but quickly composed herself. "Thank you. I needed to hear that." "Okay, let's get you in the truck. I have the heat blasting in there," Corporal Peck offered. "Where do I go now?" Jenny inquired. "I don't know exactly, but I know it's going to be safe." Jenny glanced back at the river, watching as Conrad slowly sank beneath the surface of the water. She knew he deserved better than being discarded in the river, but she couldn't change that. What she could do, however, was make the most of her second chance at life. It was the least she could do to honor his memory. The end.